Hello there. Liz Truss may have just bought herself some time to sell her package of growth to the country after a surprisingly strong keynote speech at the closing of her party's conference. Now, if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe and then like and comment below. I must say that Liz Truss gave a surprisingly strong speech at the closing of the Conservative Party conference under the banner of Getting Britain Moving. And one of her bigger supporters, the Minister for Northern Ireland Steve Baker, was cock-a-hoop with her speech and looked very pumped up by it when interviewed later on. The hall was also full, despite warnings that many conference attendees would have to leave the Birmingham venue early due to the train strikes. And not even the intervention by a couple of Greenpeace campaigners a few minutes into her speech with a banner saying "Who voted for this?" could disturb the Truss' confident composure. And the whole hall stood to clap the Prime Minister and drown out the protesters while they were quickly escorted out of the venue. In fact, the Prime Minister was able to turn the whole incident into a positive for herself by calling those campaigners a part of the anti-growth coalition of Labour, the Lib Dems and the SNP, as well as the militant unions and vested interests. And predictably, the RMT union boss Mick Lynch, who is instrumental in paralysing the country with strikes, did not like that one at all. He called her words ironic. And Truss identified herself with the people who want to get on and achieve, those who are frustrated by the activities of the anti-growth coalition. But I will remind everyone that our Prime Minister is off to Prague tomorrow for the first meeting of this new European political community, a club thought up by President Macron of France in a very badly camouflaged move to increase EU influence. And that's despite Truss talking about getting Brexit done and saying that her party will realise on the promise of Brexit. She also talked about ditching all EU-inspired red tape by the end of next year, but failed to mention Northern Ireland still being in the EU single market and remaining under ECJ jurisdiction. Anyway, channeling Tony Blair, Liz Truss said she had three priorities: growth, 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 and put out her case for tax cuts, so putting money into people's pockets to achieve that growth. This was obviously well received in the meeting hall, especially when she dismissed the naysayers with, "They prefer talking on Twitter to taking tough decisions. They taxi from North London townhouses to the BBC studio to dismiss anyone challenging the status quo. From broadcast to podcast, they peddle the same old answers. It's always more taxes, more regulation, and more meddling. Wrong, wrong, wrong," she said. But it's not the faithful in the hall that Truss has to worry about. It is the Tory MPs and disgruntled former ministers who stayed away that she needs to keep her beady eyes on. Especially as she's basically promised loads more disruption as the price of the growth we need. And as I said yesterday, unless she is able to rigorously enforce discipline among her MPs and ministers, then any positives from today will soon melt away. She's probably hoping that party members throughout the country will be encouraged by this speech and that they will whisper in their local MPs shell-like and tell them to give Liz a chance. Truss will also be hoping that the financial markets have settled down. However, sterling did slip during the day against both the US dollar and the euro, but nowhere near the recent lows. But her message of keeping an iron grip on fiscal responsibility is already under fire, with claims that the Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg has joined the throng of those saying that putting up benefits in line with inflation is the only political reality. Sounds to me like more U-turns are on the way before the policies have even been announced. Now, writing in the Telegraph, Nigel Farage says that the Truss speech was great, but it's far too late and the Tories are toast at the next election. It was all there, he said, small estate, lower taxes, and a passionate defence of the self-employed. But at this stage, he said, none of it is credible. And he points to the amount of time it takes to get such legislation through the system, especially when it's fought at every turn. 2 years will not be enough. And with all the Tory internal hatred and backbiting, they simply don't deserve to be in office and are headed for electoral disaster. They deserve nothing less. Truss has come too late, he writes. The only chance the Tories have, or maybe had, was to get 100% behind their new leader and her plans. But right now there are too many sharing those green benches with her that will do all they can to stop her succeeding. And there are also other forces at work right now. The Organisation for Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, has agreed to a massive cut in oil production, something that will stop prices falling and may even push them higher. And the UK could see it boost inflation levels as a result. The UK could also be tied into high gas prices into the future too. The UK government is looking at securing long-term contracts with Norway and Qatar to supply gas. This is being led by the Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg, with the idea that we agree to buy gas at a set price for the next 10 years or maybe even longer, just like getting a 10-year fixed-rate mortgage. But this is a big gamble. It could mean we save a bit now, but we get stung for years into the future, because we're starting from a high price point and we could end up paying far more than we need to if prices start dropping markedly in the near future. These are the sorts of deals you put together when the times are good, not when market turmoil pushes risk and price up. This is something that Liz Truss is said to be in favour of, but there are those who are worried it might also get in the way of our net zero plans if we're tied into buying high-priced gas for another decade or more. Now, do you remember the Bank of England saving the day for our pensions a few days ago? Well, interestingly, the Bank of England has not had to engage in the much talked about emergency purchase of gilts to save our pensions for 2 days now. There had been talk that this quasi-Kwarteng-inspired financial crisis would cost the Bank of England, i.e. us, up to 65 billion quid at a rate of £5 billion a day. But the Bank of England has managed to quell the turmoil with just 3.7 billion of gilt purchases. But the Chancellor still has a mortgage problem on his hands, with lenders pulling deals and putting new products on the market with some as high as 6%. Something that a couple of decades ago probably wouldn't have raised an eyelash, let alone an eyebrow. But these days it's considered almost unaffordable by many. So Kwasi has called the bosses of the big lenders in for a grilling at the Treasury tomorrow. But with inflation rising and the Independent Bank of England setting the base rate, what are the lenders meant to do to stay solvent? Well, the police of England and Wales are now committed to attending every burgled house. And the first question everyone, including former coppers, is asking is, do we have the numbers of experienced officers to go through a full investigation at every burglary? A question I asked when the Met made that same pledge a few weeks ago. Let's hope they do have the police officers available to meet this pledge. But just attending is not enough. Getting arrests and prosecutions is the all-important bit. Otherwise, it's all just a PR exercise. Maybe taking some police officers off of Twitter and Facebook patrol duties might help.